Ethan Blackwell stood at the top of the world, quite literally. The floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office framed the New York skyline like a masterpiece of power and ambition. Below, the city hummed with the relentless energy of late-night deals, black-tie galas, and whispered scandals that made and ruined fortunes overnight. He had built this empire from nothing. His name, once meaningless, now carried the weight of billions. His real estate developments shaped the Manhattan skyline, his name etched into glass and steel. To the world, Ethan Blackwell was untouchable. He was the man who always won. And yet, standing in his private office, an untouched glass of whiskey on his desk, Ethan felt it, that hollow, gnawing emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. Tonight should have been a celebration. The champagne had been poured, the media had gathered, and the elite of New York society had filled the grand ballroom of the Blackwell Tower to witness his latest triumph, a billion-dollar acquisition that secured his dominance over the industry. A deal so perfect, so ruthless, that even his competitors had no choice but to respect him. He should have been reveling in the moment. Instead, he had slipped away from the crowd, seeking the solitude of his office, away from the forced laughter and insincere toasts. Behind him, the door opened. The sharp click of heels echoed in the room before Victoria Hayes, his fiancée, stepped inside. Tall, poised, and effortlessly elegant, she was everything a man of his status should have by his side. "You disappeared," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk. She walked toward him, her fitted navy dress hugging every perfect curve. "We're supposed to be celebrating, Ethan." He exhaled slowly, turning to face her. She was right, of course. He had promised her the world, the perfect life, the perfect marriage, a union that would solidify their place as New York's most powerful couple. But tonight, the usual satisfaction eluded him. "Just needed a moment," he murmured, loosening his tie. Victoria studied him, her piercing blue eyes narrowing slightly. She was no fool. She could read him better than most. "Don't tell me you're getting sentimental." She smiled, but there was an edge to it. "This is what you wanted. Everything you've worked for. You, more than anyone, know that success comes at a price." A price. For a moment, an image flashed through his mind, one he had long buried beneath steel and glass, beneath cold calculations and relentless ambition. A woman standing in the doorway of his old penthouse, tears in her eyes, a suitcase beside her, a hand resting on her stomach. "Don't do this, Ethan, please." But he had done it. He had chosen power over love, and he had never looked back. Until now. A knock at the door pulled him from the past. His assistant, Mark, stepped inside, holding an iPad. His face was carefully neutral, but Ethan could see something behind his professional mask. Hesitation. "There's something you need to see," Mark said, handing him the device. Ethan took it, scanning the screen, and then his breath caught. The headline hit him like a punch to the ribs. "Claire Whitmore returns to New York, the billionaire mogul's ex-wife, back with a vengeance." His grip tightened around the device. Below the headline was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. Claire, the woman he had discarded, the woman he had assumed would never come back. Except she had. And the look in her eyes told him everything. She wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here for war. Victoria leaned over his shoulder, her expression unreadable as she took in the headline. "Well," she murmured, resting a manicured hand on his arm, "this should be interesting." Ethan stared at the screen, his pulse drumming in his ears. After 20 years, the past he thought he had buried had returned. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Blackwell wasn't sure he would win. The private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport just after sunset, the deep blue sky streaked with the last remnants of daylight. Claire Whitmore leaned back against her seat, exhaling slowly as the engines hummed their final descent. The city she had once called home was waiting for her. Its towering skyline a glittering mirage of everything she had lost, everything she had fought to reclaim. 20 years. 20 years since she had been thrown out, with nothing but a suitcase and the life growing inside her. The flight attendant approached with a polite smile. "Ms. Whitmore, the car is ready." Claire nodded, gathering her things. She had chosen to travel light, despite the luxury at her disposal. Old habits. When you learned to build from nothing, excess lost its meaning. As she stepped onto the tarmac, the cool New York air wrapped around her like a long-forgotten whisper. The city had changed, but so had she, and she hadn't come back for nostalgia. Sliding into the black town car waiting for her, she pulled out her phone. A notification lit up the screen. Rachel Carter. "He knows you're here." Claire's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Of course he did. Ethan Blackwell always kept an eye on what he feared most. The restaurant was discreet, one of those exclusive Manhattan spots where money could buy silence and privacy. Claire sat at a candlelit table across from Rachel, her longtime friend and the closest thing she had to family. Rachel, ever sharp-eyed, took a sip of her wine before setting the glass down. "He's going to come looking for you." Claire twirled the stem of her own glass between her fingers. "Good." Rachel sighed. "I know you've been waiting for this, but are you ready?" Claire tilted her head, considering the question. Ready? Had she ever been truly ready for the storm that was Ethan Blackwell? Even all those years ago when she had loved him so fiercely that she ignored the warnings in his eyes, the ones that told her power would always be his first love. "I didn't come back to play his game, Rachel," Claire finally said. "I came back to win." Rachel leaned forward. "And Daniel?" The name struck deeper than it should have. Claire took a slow breath, steadying herself. "He doesn't know everything yet," she admitted. "But he will, when the time is right." Rachel's gaze softened. "He deserves the truth, Claire." Claire nodded but said nothing. She had built a life for her son far away from Ethan's world of power and betrayal. Daniel had grown up knowing only strength, determination, and the unwavering love of a mother who refused to let her past define her. But there was a part of him, a restless, questioning part, that had always wondered about the man who had abandoned them. Now, the answers were within reach. The question was, would he be ready to hear them? Ethan's car pulled up outside his penthouse in the heart of the city, but he barely registered the sleek black exterior of the building that bore his name. His thoughts were elsewhere, on her. Claire Whitmore was back in New York. After 20 years of silence, she had returned without a word of warning, stepping into his world as if she had never left. And she wasn't here for a quiet reunion. The article had made that clear. She was bidding against him on the most significant real estate project of the year, the kind of deal that could shift the balance of power in the industry. A decade ago, he wouldn't have given it a second thought. He would have crushed her. But Claire was not a woman easily crushed. He had learned that the hard way. Stepping into his penthouse, Ethan loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. The amber liquid swirled in the glass as he stared out over the city. His mind was already calculating his next move. She had returned to his world with an empire of her own, a woman forged in fire, and she had done it without him. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. This was going to be interesting. The ballroom of the Blackwell Tower shimmered with wealth and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, while the city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was thick with the scent of champagne and expensive perfume, and beneath the polished veneer of polite conversation, deals were being made, alliances were being formed, and power was shifting hands. Ethan Blackwell stood at the center of it all. Tonight was supposed to be about victory, a celebration of his latest acquisition, a billion-dollar deal that solidified his dominance in the industry. But despite the murmurs of admiration and the clinking of glasses in his honor, Ethan's focus was elsewhere. He scanned the room, his gaze sharp, searching. And then he saw her. Claire Whitmore had arrived. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Her dark navy dress hugged her figure in a way that was both elegant and undeniably powerful. Her chin lifted as if she had never once known the weight of defeat. For a moment, Ethan forgot to breathe. It wasn't just that she was stunning. It was that she was different, stronger, untouchable. And yet, beneath all of it, she was still her. The woman he had once loved. The woman he had once betrayed. Victoria, standing beside him, followed his gaze and stiffened. "She certainly knows how to make an entrance," she murmured, her tone laced with calculated amusement. Ethan smirked, but his grip tightened around his glass. "She always did." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What do you think she wants?" Ethan knew exactly what Claire wanted. She wanted him to know that she was back, that she wasn't afraid, that she was ready for war. But Claire wasn't the only one making statements tonight. Ethan set his glass down and crossed the room. Claire saw him coming before he reached her, but she didn't move. She didn't flinch. If anything, she smiled. "Ethan," she greeted, her voice smooth, untouched by time. "Claire." It was a simple exchange, but the weight behind it was immeasurable. His gaze raked over her, taking in the woman before him. She wasn't the Claire he had last seen, the woman who had pleaded with him to reconsider, tears in her eyes, a suitcase at her feet. No, this Claire was unreadable, composed, dangerous, and that made her more intriguing than ever. "You've been busy," he said, his voice measured. "The press seems to think you've built quite the empire." Claire tilted her head. "I had a good teacher." Ethan chuckled, low and dark. "If I remember correctly, you preferred to do things your own way." Her smile didn't waver. "And look where it got me." The words were a challenge, a reminder. Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Are we really going to do this here, Claire?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "Oh, Ethan," she murmured, a flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. "This is only the beginning." The heat between them crackled, an old fire rekindled not by love, but by something sharper, by unfinished business, by a war 20 years in the making. Before Ethan could respond, another voice interrupted. "Mom?" Ethan froze. Slowly he turned his head and met the eyes of the young man standing a few feet away. Daniel Whitmore, his son, the boy he had never known, the man who had grown up without him. And in that moment, for the first time in as long as he could remember, Ethan Blackwell didn't know what to say. Ethan Blackwell had faced corporate titans, cutthroat investors, and legal battles that could have toppled empires. He had stared down men who would do anything to see him fail and always walked away victorious. But nothing, not all the power, not all the wealth, not all the carefully cultivated control, had prepared him for this. For him. Daniel Whitmore stood before him, tall, confident, and unmistakably his son. The resemblance was uncanny. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing blue eyes that had once belonged to Ethan's father. But there was something else, too, something that didn't come from him. It was in the way Daniel held himself, the way his gaze didn't waver, the quiet but undeniable strength in his presence. That was Claire. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt something dangerously close to regret. Daniel. His own voice sounded foreign, rougher than he intended. Daniel's expression remained unreadable, but there was something simmering beneath the surface, something unspoken. "Mr. Blackwell," Daniel said evenly. "Not Dad, not even Ethan, just Mr. Blackwell." Ethan clenched his jaw, the words cutting deeper than he cared to admit. Claire, standing between them, remained silent, watching. She wasn't going to interfere. This was between them now. Ethan exhaled slowly, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. He wasn't used to feeling off balance, but Daniel's presence had thrown him. "I didn't expect to see you here," Ethan said finally. Daniel gave a slow, deliberate nod. "That makes two of us." A pause, long enough for the weight of 2 decades to settle between them. Then Daniel's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But then again, it's not like you were ever expecting to see me at all, were you?" Claire's fingers twitched at her side. She remained poised, but Ethan knew her too well. The tension in her body, the subtle shift in her expression. She was preparing herself for what was coming. Ethan met Daniel's gaze head-on. "I don't expect you to understand, but—" Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Understand?" He shook his head, running a hand through his dark hair. "No, you're right, Mr. Blackwell. I don't understand. I don't understand how a man can walk away from his own child and never look back. I don't understand how someone can pretend like none of it ever happened." Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice quieter now. "But you should know—" Daniel held up a hand, cutting him off. "I don't need to know anything from you," Daniel said coolly. "Not anymore." Claire finally spoke, her voice measured. "Daniel, let's not do this here." Daniel let out a breath, shaking his head. "You're right, this isn't the place." He turned back to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "But don't worry. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other soon. After all, I hear we're in the same business now." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, watching as the past he had tried so hard to outrun finally caught up to him. Claire lingered for a moment longer. "You wanted to know what I came back for," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "Now you know." Then she turned, following her son. Ethan exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the nearest table, his mind a whirlwind of memories, regrets, and something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in decades, Ethan Blackwell wasn't the one holding the power. And he hated it. Claire sat in the back of the sleek black town car, her hands resting in her lap, though tension coiled in her fingers. The night's events replayed in her mind, but it wasn't Ethan's presence that unsettled her. She had been prepared for that, had anticipated the inevitable collision between them. It was Daniel. She glanced sideways at her son. He was staring out the window, his jaw set in the same way Ethan's always had been when he was trying to hide his emotions. The resemblance was striking, and in this moment, painfully ironic. The confrontation had rattled him, even if he'd played it off well. "Daniel," she said softly. He didn't look at her. "Don't, Mom." She sighed. "I know tonight was a lot." Daniel let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You think?" She watched as his fingers drummed against his knee, his usual tell when he was deep in thought. He was always the calm one, the rational one. But tonight she had seen something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, something uncertain, something raw. For years Daniel had never asked about Ethan, not once. He had always been focused on the future, on building his own success. But now? Now, it was as if the mere sight of Ethan Blackwell had unlocked something inside him that neither of them were ready for. Claire folded her hands together, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't bring you back to New York for this." Daniel finally turned to face her. "Didn't you?" His voice wasn't accusatory, but there was an edge to it. Claire met his gaze, unflinching. "Number, I brought you here because you earned this opportunity. Because you deserve to be at the table." Daniel scoffed. And it just happens to be his table? She inhaled slowly. You know as well as I do that Ethan Blackwell doesn't own New York. Daniel let out another humorless laugh. He sure acts like he does. Claire didn't argue, because once upon a time Ethan Blackwell had acted like he owned her too. She placed a hand over Daniel's. You don't owe him anything, Daniel. Not an explanation, not a confrontation, nothing. For a moment her son didn't respond. Then he nodded. But Claire knew better than to think the conversation was over. Ethan had gotten under his skin, and she hated that more than she could put into words. Ethan stood at the bar in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand, but he hadn't taken a sip. Instead, he stared at the skyline, at the city that had once been his to control. He had spent his entire career turning obstacles into stepping stones, problems into opportunities. But nothing had prepared him for the moment he had come face to face with his son. Daniel was everything Ethan had spent years pretending didn't exist. A living, breathing reminder of the choices he had made, of the woman he had abandoned, of the life he could have had. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. Across the room, Victoria stepped into view, her expression unreadable. So, she said smoothly, stepping closer. That was him, wasn't it? Ethan said nothing. Victoria picked up the bottle of whiskey and poured herself a glass. He looks like you. Ethan remained silent. Victoria took a slow sip before setting her glass down. Should I be worried? That caught his attention. His eyes flicked toward her. About what? Victoria leaned against the counter, her expression carefully measured. You tell me. Your ex-wife just returned to New York. Your son, who you've never met, is suddenly in your orbit, and you... She tilted her head, studying him. You're not exactly acting like a man who's unaffected. Ethan clenched his jaw. Claire and I have unfinished business. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling it? He shot her a sharp look, but she only smirked. Look, Ethan, I don't do jealousy, she said, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. But I do like to know when I'm dealing with an opponent. Ethan set his drink down, his patience wearing thin. Claire isn't an opponent. Victoria arched a brow. No? She leaned in slightly. Then why do you look like a man who just realized he's already lost? Ethan didn't respond, because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he had an answer. Claire stepped onto the balcony of her penthouse, the cool night air kissing her skin. The city stretched out before her, alive with movement, with sound. Rachel appeared in the doorway, 2 glasses of wine in hand. I figured you could use this. Claire took the glass, offering her friend a grateful smile. Rachel leaned against the railing. I saw how he looked at you tonight. Claire exhaled, shaking her head. Don't start. Rachel smirked. I don't have to start anything. It's already happening. Claire sipped her wine, choosing to ignore that. Rachel sighed. Be honest. Did it feel as good as you thought it would? Claire stared out at the skyline. Better. Rachel chuckled. And worse? Claire closed her eyes briefly before opening them again. So much worse. Because no matter how much she had prepared for this moment, no matter how much she had convinced herself that she was untouchable, standing in front of Ethan again had done something to her, something she wasn't ready to face. And that terrified her more than anything. Ethan Blackwell didn't make mistakes. At least, that's what he had told himself for the past 20 years. Everything he had built, his empire, his reputation, his relentless control over the industry, was a result of calculated decisions, ruthless efficiency, no room for second-guessing, no room for regret. And yet, regret had found him anyway. Sitting behind the expansive mahogany desk in his office, Ethan skimmed through the morning's business reports. The numbers were solid, his stock was stable, and his latest deal had secured his standing at the top. On paper, he was untouchable. In reality? Claire Whitmore's name was everywhere. A power player. Returns. Claire Whitmore's bid shakes up Manhattan real estate. Once the wife of a tycoon, now a mogul in her own right. Claire Whitmore is back. Blackwell Enterprises faces unexpected challenger in high-stakes development deal. Ethan leaned back in his chair, tossing the tablet onto the desk with a sharp exhale. She wasn't just back. She was coming for him. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mark, his assistant, stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Sir, Graham Holloway just arrived. He says it's urgent." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Send him in." A moment later, Graham Holloway strode into the office. Unlike Ethan, who had mastered the art of cold control, Graham carried his power differently. Charismatic, easygoing, the kind of man who made people trust him before they realized they'd been outplayed. Once, they had been partners, friends even. Now they were rivals. Graham took a seat across from Ethan's desk, crossing one leg over the other as he studied him. "You look like a man who just got blindsided." Ethan didn't flinch. "Let's cut the theatrics. What do you want?" Graham smirked, tapping his fingers against the armrest. "You already know, don't you?" Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Claire." Graham's smirk deepened. "She's good, isn't she?" Ethan's stomach tightened. "I assume you didn't come here just to sing her praises." Graham leaned forward. "No, I came here to make something clear. Claire isn't some woman you can steamroll. She's not 24 and vulnerable anymore. She's built something real, and she's not going to back down." Ethan clenched his jaw. "You think I don't know that?" Graham tilted his head. "Then why do you look like a man who doesn't know what to do next?" Ethan didn't respond, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure. Claire stepped out of the black SUV, adjusting the sleeve of her silk blouse as the cool morning air wrapped around her. The conference room she was about to enter would be filled with men who had doubted her, who had whispered behind closed doors that she would never return, never rise to their level. She had no intention of proving them wrong. She intended to surpass them entirely. Rachel met her at the entrance, a knowing smirk on her face. "They're already in there." Claire nodded, adjusting her posture. "Good." Rachel hesitated. "Are you ready for this?" Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I was ready 20 years ago." With that, she stepped inside. The room fell silent as she entered, all eyes turning toward her. At the head of the table sat the man who had once ruled her world, Ethan Blackwell. Their gazes locked and the air shifted. This wasn't just business. This was a reckoning, and neither of them planned to lose. Ethan Blackwell had sat at the head of countless boardrooms, facing down rivals who thought they could challenge him. But none had ever rattled him the way Claire Whitmore did as she took her seat across from him. She moved with an effortless confidence, as if she belonged here. Because she did. There was no hesitation, no flicker of vulnerability. She was no longer the woman he had left behind. She was the woman who had come back to take what she deserved. The tension in the room was palpable as the meeting commenced. The Blackwell Enterprises team, along with other executives and investors, watched the power struggle unfold in real time. Claire leaned back slightly, her hands folded in her lap, a picture of calm. "Let's not waste time. We both know why we're here." Ethan gave her a slow, assessing look. "By all means, Claire, enlighten us." Her smile was sharp. "I'm here to secure the Hudson Yards development deal, the same one you were planning to steamroll your way through." Murmurs filled the room. Ethan tilted his head, feigning amusement. "And you think you can outbid me?" Claire didn't flinch. "I already have." Silence. A slow smirk crept onto Ethan's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. You always were ambitious. She met his gaze without hesitation. You always underestimated me. Rachel, sitting beside Claire, slid a document across the table. Whitmore Holdings has secured primary investor backing and exclusive architectural rights for the development. The city board is already leaning in our favor, unless, of course, Blackwell Enterprises can make an offer worth reconsidering. Ethan knew the game well. This wasn't just about business. This was about power. And Claire wasn't just trying to win the deal. She was proving that she could challenge him, that she wasn't afraid of him. Victoria, seated to Ethan's right, spoke for the first time. You can't be serious. You think because you waltzed back into New York, people are going to hand you this. Claire's expression didn't change, but the amusement in her eyes darkened. No, Victoria. I think they're going to choose me over Ethan. Ethan leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. Be careful, Claire. You don't want to start a war you can't win. She leaned in, mirroring his stance. Then it's a good thing I never learned how to lose. The room held its collective breath. Ethan had spent 2 decades carving his dominance into this city. He had fought, clawed, and built his empire from nothing. And now, the one woman who had every reason to hate him had positioned herself as his biggest competitor. Damn if it didn't make him respect her more. Damn if it didn't make him want her more. But this wasn't about want. This was about survival. He exhaled slowly, pulling back just enough to mask the way she had gotten under his skin. Let's see what the board decides then. Claire smiled. Let's. The meeting adjourned, and as the executives and investors began filtering out, Claire gathered her papers with deliberate ease. She didn't rush. She didn't falter. She knew he was watching her. Ethan stood, adjusting his cufflinks as he stepped closer. You played that well. She met his gaze. I learned from the best. He smirked. I'm not going to make this easy for you. Claire's eyes flickered with something unreadable. I don't need it to be easy, Ethan. I just need it to be fair. A beat of silence. Then she walked past him, leaving him standing there. And for the first time in his career, Ethan Blackwell wasn't sure if he had just met his greatest opponent or his greatest regret. The city pulsed with energy as Claire stepped out of the Blackwell Tower and into the crisp evening air. The streets of Manhattan stretched before her, a glittering expanse of wealth, ambition, and history. Her history. She had stood inside that building before, years ago, as a different woman. Back then she had walked through those doors carrying hope, love, and blind faith in a man who had chosen power over her. Tonight, she had walked out of them as his rival. Rachel fell into step beside her, heels clicking against the pavement. That went well. Claire let out a slow breath. Define well. Rachel smirked. You made Ethan Blackwell blink. That's a win in my book. Claire gave her a sidelong glance. He didn't blink. He's watching, waiting. He's going to fight back. Rachel shrugged. Then let him. He doesn't scare you anymore. No, he didn't. But that wasn't what unsettled her. What unsettled her was the way her heart had tightened, just for a moment, when their gazes had locked across the boardroom. The way his voice, low and edged with warning, had sent a familiar shiver down her spine. She had spent 20 years burying that part of her. And Ethan had just unearthed it. She refused to let it matter. Let's get ahead of him, Claire said, shifting gears. I want a meeting with the city board. If we push our environmental proposal for the Hudson Yards project, we can win public support before he has a chance to counter. Rachel nodded. I'll set it up. Claire reached for the door of her car, pausing. And Rachel? Her friend glanced back. If Ethan tries to play dirty, we're ready. Rachel's smile was sharp. Always. Ethan stood in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, his hands braced against the edge of the window pane. Claire. She had walked into that meeting like she owned the room, like she belonged there, like she had never once been a woman he had left behind. He had underestimated her. He could admit that now. She had learned how to play the game, his game, and damn if she wasn't playing it well. Behind him, the soft clink of glass against marble signaled Victoria's presence. "You should have crushed her the moment she walked into that boardroom," she said smoothly, handing him a drink. Ethan took it but didn't sip. "You think this is that simple?" Victoria folded her arms, watching him closely. "She's a threat, Ethan." "She's also smart," he countered. "She wouldn't have come back without a strategy." Victoria's gaze darkened. "You still think like a businessman. I think like a woman. Claire's not just here for the deal. She's here to prove something." Ethan finally turned to face her. "And what exactly do you think she's trying to prove?" Victoria's lips curled slightly. "That she can win, that she doesn't need you." Ethan's grip tightened around his glass. Because that was the part that stung, wasn't it? She had built herself into something formidable. Without him. "I'll handle it," Ethan said, his voice low. Victoria studied him for a moment. Then she stepped closer, resting a hand on his chest. "Just remember who's standing beside you now." Ethan held her gaze. "I haven't forgotten." Victoria smiled, but the warning in her eyes was clear, because while Ethan was busy looking at Claire, Victoria was watching him. Daniel Whitmore didn't know why he was here. Standing outside one of Manhattan's most exclusive bars, hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, he felt the pull of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't resentment. It was something heavier. For 20 years, Ethan Blackwell had been nothing more than a name, a ghost of a past his mother never talked about. And now, that ghost had a face, one that looked far too much like his own. With a quiet sigh, Daniel pushed open the door, stepping inside. The bar was sleek, dimly lit, filled with men in expensive suits who measured their worth in billion-dollar deals. He spotted Ethan almost immediately, sitting alone at a table near the back, nursing a drink, lost in thought. Daniel hesitated. He could walk away. He could leave Ethan Blackwell to his empire, to his choices, to his regrets. But then Ethan looked up, and for the first time in his life, their eyes met without a boardroom, without a crowd, without a battle between them. Just a father and a son, standing on opposite sides of a moment neither of them knew how to navigate. Daniel exhaled. Then he walked toward the table. Ethan Blackwell had never been a man who let emotions dictate his actions. He built his empire on control, on calculated moves, on never letting anything or anyone get too close. But as he watched Daniel walk toward him, his grip tightened around the glass in his hand. His son, the boy he had never known, the man he had become without him. Ethan had prepared himself for this moment for 20 years, by convincing himself it would never happen. Daniel reached the table, hesitating only a fraction of a second, before pulling out the chair opposite Ethan and sitting down. A waiter appeared, but Daniel waved him off, eyes locked onto Ethan's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel leaned back, exhaling sharply. "I don't even know why I'm here." Ethan set his drink down. "I won't pretend I expected you to be." Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Right, because you expected me to stay in my corner, out of sight, out of mind." His gaze sharpened. "That's how you handled things, isn't it? Just pretended I didn't exist?" Ethan's jaw tensed. He could feel the weight of Daniel's resentment, years of unspoken words pressing between them like an iron wall. "I didn't pretend," Ethan said quietly. "I knew." Daniel scoffed. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand over his face. He had spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, winning wars fought in boardrooms, outmaneuvering the best minds in the industry. But this was the one battle he had no strategy for. "I made mistakes," he admitted. The words tasted foreign in his mouth, heavy with the weight of years lost. "And I don't expect you to forgive them." Daniel's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. "Then why are you saying it?" Ethan met his gaze. "Because it's the truth." Daniel studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. "I grew up wondering about you," Daniel said finally, his voice quieter now. "What kind of man you were, if you ever thought about me, if you ever regretted leaving." Ethan swallowed hard. "I thought about you every day." Daniel's brows furrowed slightly, his carefully guarded expression slipping, just for a second. Then he shook his head, exhaling. "Then why? Why did you do it?" Ethan had asked himself the same question 1,000 times. And for years he had given himself the same cold, logical answer, because it was necessary. But sitting across from his son now, that answer felt hollow. "Because I was a fool," Ethan said simply. "Because I was selfish. Because I thought power was the only thing that mattered." Daniel didn't respond right away. His fingers tapped against the table, his mind working through the words. Ethan braced himself for another sharp retort, another rejection. Instead, Daniel let out a slow breath. "I don't know if I hate you," he admitted, "but I don't know if I want to know you either." Ethan nodded. It was more than he deserved. Daniel pushed back his chair, standing. "I need time." Ethan watched as his son, walked away, disappearing into the crowded bar. He had spent 20 years convincing himself he had no regrets. Now, watching Daniel leave, he finally admitted the truth. He had just met his greatest one. Claire Whitmore was not a woman easily rattled. She had faced countless boardrooms filled with men who underestimated her, fought her way through an industry that was never built to accommodate women like her, and raised a son without the shadow of the man who had abandoned them both. And yet, as she sat in her office, staring out at the New York skyline, her mind was stuck in a loop. Daniel had met Ethan. She hadn't been there to stop it. Her grip on the crystal tumbler tightened before she set it down on the glass desk with a controlled breath. Rachel, who had been watching her in silence for the past few minutes, finally spoke. "You're spiraling." Claire shot her a sharp look. "I don't spiral." Rachel lifted a brow. "You do when Ethan Blackwell is involved." Claire exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "I should have warned Daniel." "He's not a kid anymore," Rachel reminded her. "And whether you like it or not, he needed to face him." Claire clenched her jaw. "Ethan doesn't get to just show up in Daniel's life like he has a right to anything." Rachel studied her for a moment before speaking. "And what if Daniel wants to know him?" The words landed heavier than Claire cared to admit. She had spent 2 decades raising Daniel to be his own man, shaping him into someone who was strong, brilliant, and capable of standing on his own. But she had also spent those years shielding him from the past, from the father who had chosen power over family. Had she been protecting him? Or had she been protecting herself? Before she could answer, her office phone rang. Claire glanced at the screen. Ethan Blackwell. Rachel's brows shot up. "Well, speak of the devil." Claire hesitated for a brief second before answering. "Ethan." "Claire," he said smoothly, as if her name had never once been spoken in anger. "We need to talk." She exhaled, already annoyed. "We did that already," In a boardroom, where I outmaneuvered you." He chuckled, low and dark. "For now." She rolled her eyes. "Did you call just to stroke your ego, or is there a point to this?" There was a pause on the other end before Ethan said, "Meet me for dinner." Claire almost laughed. "That's not happening." "I have a proposition." She smirked, leaning back in her chair. "You want to negotiate? Do it through legal channels like everyone else." "This isn't about the Hudson Yards deal," he said. His voice was different now, lower, more serious. That gave her pause. "I'll text you the details," Ethan continued. "You can decide if you want to hear what I have to say." She hated that he still knew how to intrigue her. Before she could argue, the line went dead. Rachel crossed her arms. "Are you really considering it?" Claire let out a slow breath. "No," she said, even as her pulse quickened. "But I want to know what he's up to." Rachel smirked. "And here I thought you didn't play games." Claire stood, smoothing the fabric of her blouse. "I don't," she said. Then she grabbed her coat. "But I never lose either." The restaurant Ethan had chosen was intimate, exclusive, a place for powerful men who didn't like to be overheard. Claire walked through the entrance, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors, and found Ethan already seated at a private table in the corner. He looked as composed as ever, a picture of wealth and control in his dark suit, a glass of whiskey in front of him. As she approached, he stood, a subtle but deliberate move, a reminder of the man he had been when they first met. "You're lucky I was curious," she said as she sat down, crossing her legs. Ethan smirked. "You always were." A waiter appeared, but Claire waved him off. "Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" Ethan studied her, then leaned forward slightly. "Daniel." Her muscles tensed. "What about him?" Ethan's expression was unreadable. "I want to know him." Claire clenched her jaw. "You lost that right 20 years ago." "I know." His voice was even, controlled. "And I know I can't change the past, but I can change what happens next." Claire folded her arms. "And what exactly do you think happens next, Ethan? You expect Daniel to just accept you? To suddenly be interested in having a father who never wanted him?" Ethan's jaw ticked. "I did want him." Claire let out a humorless laugh. "Funny, that's not how I remember it." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. For a brief moment he looked tired. She wasn't used to seeing him like that. "I made mistakes, Claire," he admitted, "but I don't want Daniel to pay for them." She swallowed hard, because for the first time in 20 years, Ethan Blackwell sounded like a man who had lost something, and it terrified her how much she wanted to believe him. Claire took a slow breath, letting Ethan's words settle between them like an unfinished sentence. "I don't want Daniel to pay for my mistakes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the restaurant, the low murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses. It all faded into the background. Claire wanted to believe that Ethan had changed, that the man sitting across from her, looking at her with something close to sincerity, was capable of regret. But she had learned the hard way that wanting something to be true didn't make it real. She set down her napkin, leveling him with a cool stare. "You don't get to rewrite history." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not what I'm trying to do." "Isn't it?" She leaned in slightly, her voice low but firm. "Because the way I remember it, you didn't just walk away from me. You walked away from him. You made a choice, Ethan. And now, 20 years later, you suddenly care?" Ethan exhaled, fingers tightening around his whiskey glass. "You think I haven't thought about him every damn day?" Claire's chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. He wasn't allowed to say things like that, not after everything. "I don't care what you thought," she said evenly, I care about what you did. And what you did was leave. Ethan ran a hand over his face, looking momentarily exhausted. I was 26, Claire. I thought... He stopped himself, shaking his head. Number, I didn't think. That was the problem. Claire folded her arms. You don't get points for self-awareness now. Ethan let out a sharp breath. You want to keep punishing me? Fine. I deserve it. But Daniel doesn't. Claire's fingers curled into her palm. You don't get to say his name like that. Ethan's eyes flashed with something unreadable. He's my son too. Her stomach twisted, an old wound reopening with a fresh sting. You don't get to claim him, she said, voice like steel. Not after 2 decades of silence. Ethan held her gaze. He came to me. Claire went still. What? Ethan exhaled. After the gala, he found me. Her pulse stuttered. Daniel hadn't told her. She had assumed his first encounter with Ethan had been a fluke, an unavoidable run-in. But if Daniel had sought him out... Claire forced herself to remain calm. And what did he say? Ethan hesitated. That he doesn't know if he hates me. Her heart clenched. Daniel had been so certain, so unwavering in his belief that Ethan didn't matter. But now there were cracks in that certainty. And Ethan had found them first. Claire inhaled, steeling herself. I won't let you manipulate him. Ethan's expression darkened. Is that what you think this is? I think you only know how to take, Claire said quietly. And Daniel is not another acquisition for you to win. Ethan's jaw clenched. I don't want to win. I just want a chance. Claire's fingers tightened around her glass. And if he doesn't want to give it to you? Ethan hesitated. Then that's his decision. The words surprised her. The Ethan she had known never left decisions in someone else's hands. He never accepted outcomes he couldn't control. And yet here he was, admitting that Daniel had a choice. Claire's heart ached in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent 20 years holding on to the past, carrying the weight of Ethan's absence for both herself and Daniel. But what if Daniel wanted to carry some of it himself now? She hated that thought. She hated that she had to let it happen. Claire exhaled slowly. Fine. Ethan looked at her carefully. Fine? She met his gaze. You want a chance? Then you wait for him to decide. No pushing, no games. If Daniel wants to know you, he will. Ethan nodded. I can agree to that. Claire studied him for a long moment. Don't make me regret this. Ethan's expression softened, just for a second. That was never my intention. She swallowed hard. Because for the first time in years, she almost believed him. And that terrified her most of all. Claire didn't remember the last time she had felt so off balance. The city streets blurred past the car window as she rode in silence, her thoughts tangled in the conversation she had just had with Ethan. She had walked into that dinner ready for war, ready to remind him of everything he had lost, everything he had thrown away. And yet somehow she had walked away feeling unsettled, because Ethan Blackwell had done something she never expected. He hadn't fought her. He hadn't tried to manipulate, push, or force his way into Daniel's life. He had simply asked for a chance. And for the first time in 20 years, Claire didn't know if she had the power to deny him. The car pulled up to her building, and Claire exhaled sharply before stepping out. She needed time to think, to process. But as soon as she entered her penthouse, Daniel was waiting for her. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. Mom. Claire hesitated for only a second before closing the door behind her. Daniel. His jaw tightened. You saw him. There was no accusation in his voice, just quiet certainty. Claire sighed, setting her purse down on the kitchen island. Yes. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I should have told you. Claire studied him. Why didn't you? He hesitated. Because I didn't know what it meant. Her chest tightened. And now? Daniel met her gaze. I still don't. Silence stretched between them. Then Daniel walked over to the window, looking out at the city. I always thought I knew who he was. A name, a story you told me, a choice that he made. Claire swallowed. Nothing about that has changed. Daniel turned back to her. Hasn't it? She flinched, because deep down she knew the answer. Ethan had changed, and that terrified her more than anything. Daniel, she said carefully, I'm not telling you what to do. But I need you to be careful. Daniel's lips curled into a sad smile. I know, but I think I need to figure this out for myself. Claire wanted to argue, to protect him, but he wasn't a child anymore. And for the first time she had to let him decide for himself. Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. He had done everything he could to prepare for this moment. And yet nothing had prepared him for Daniel, or for Claire. He had expected anger, resentment, a war he was willing to fight. But he hadn't expected this. A chance to be a father. A chance to be something more than the man who had walked away. A chance to rewrite the only mistake he had ever truly regretted. His phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. He picked it up and saw the name flashing on the screen. Daniel. Ethan inhaled sharply before answering. Daniel. There was a pause. Then quietly. Are you free tomorrow? Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second before responding. I'll be there. And for the first time in 20 years, he meant it. Ethan arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. The place was understated but refined. A quiet corner spot tucked away from the usual high-profile Manhattan bustle. It wasn't the kind of place he frequented. No high-stakes business meetings, no deals being made in hushed voices. Just real conversations. And that, perhaps, was why Daniel had chosen it. Ethan took a slow breath, adjusting his cufflinks as he sat at a small table near the window. A part of him, one that he hated acknowledging, felt nervous. He wasn't a man who second-guessed himself. He had built his life on certainty, on control. But sitting here, waiting for his son, he had none. Then the door opened. Daniel stepped inside, scanning the room before spotting him. Ethan braced himself as Daniel made his way over, each step measured, deliberate. No hesitation. The same way he walked into a negotiation. When Daniel reached the table, he didn't sit right away. Instead, he studied Ethan, as if trying to decide if he truly belonged in front of him. Finally, he pulled out the chair and sat down. Thanks for coming, Daniel said, his tone neutral. Ethan nodded. You asked. I came. A flicker of something crossed Daniel's face. Surprise, maybe, as if he hadn't expected Ethan to follow through. Ethan didn't blame him. A waitress approached, offering menus, but Daniel shook his head. Just coffee. Ethan did the same. Once she left, silence stretched between them. Daniel tapped his fingers against the table, exhaling. I don't know where to start. Ethan leaned back slightly, giving him space. Start anywhere. Daniel hesitated, then said, Did you ever think about reaching out? Ethan exhaled slowly. Every day. Daniel frowned. Then why didn't you? Ethan could have given a dozen excuses. That he thought Claire wouldn't allow it. That he convinced himself Daniel was better off without him. That his pride, his arrogance, had made it easier to pretend he hadn't made the worst mistake of his life. But none of those excuses mattered. I was a coward, Ethan admitted. I told myself it was too late. That you wouldn't want me in your life. That I didn't deserve to be. Daniel didn't react right away. He just stared at Ethan, searching his face, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. You're right. Ethan's chest tightened. Daniel leaned forward. I don't know if I want to know you. His voice was quiet but firm. I spent my whole life without you. I don't need a father now. Ethan swallowed hard. He had prepared himself for that, or at least he thought he had. But, Daniel continued, his gaze steady, I do want to understand. Ethan's brow furrowed. Understand? Daniel nodded. I need to know why you left, and I need to know who you are now. Not because I need closure, but because I want to decide for myself if you're worth knowing. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. He had spent years convincing himself that Daniel would never give him the chance to explain, that he had burned that bridge beyond repair. But here Daniel was, offering him one, and Ethan had never been more afraid of losing something. Okay, Ethan said, his voice quiet. Ask me anything. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. And for the first time in 20 years, they began. Claire had always believed that time healed wounds, that success, self-reliance, and the walls she had built around her heart would be enough to keep the past from touching her again. But as she sat in her penthouse, staring at the untouched glass of wine in front of her, she realized something unsettling. Time hadn't healed anything. It had only buried it. Her phone buzzed on the table. She didn't have to check the screen to know who it was. Ethan. For a moment she considered ignoring it. But something in her gut told her this wasn't a conversation she could avoid. Sighing, she picked up the phone and answered. What do you want, Ethan? There was a pause. Then, his voice lower than usual. Daniel met with me today. Claire sat up straighter. And? Ethan exhaled. I told him the truth. Her chest tightened. Which version of it? The real one. Claire closed her eyes briefly. She had spent years preparing for this moment, the moment when Daniel would start forming his own opinions about Ethan. And now, that moment had arrived. What did he say? She asked. Ethan hesitated. That he doesn't know if he wants to know me, but he's willing to try. Claire swallowed hard. And you? What do you want? Ethan's voice softened. You know what I want. Silence. Claire stared out at the city skyline, her fingers tightening around her glass. I don't know if I can let you back in, Ethan. The words felt heavier than she expected. Not after everything. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, gently, I don't blame you. Claire exhaled slowly, her emotions a storm beneath the surface. She had spent 20 years telling herself she hated Ethan, that she had moved past him, that he no longer had power over her. But the truth was, even now, his voice could still make her heart skip a beat. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. I need time, she admitted. Ethan's voice was steady. Take all the time you need. And for the first time he didn't try to fight her, and maybe that was how she knew. That he had changed. The wind rolled in from the Hudson, carrying with it the distant hum of the city. New York, at its most alive. Claire stood on the rooftop terrace of her building, hands gripping the cool metal railing as she gazed at the skyline. It looked different to her now. For 20 years she had seen this city as a battlefield. Every deal she closed, every building she acquired, every name she proved wrong. It had all been about survival, about proving to herself, to the world, that she didn't need anyone, that she could take what was hers and never look back. And yet, for the first time, she wondered if all this time she had been fighting ghosts. Behind her, the door opened with a quiet creak. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Ethan. She felt him before he spoke, his presence settling into the space between them like an unspoken memory. I wasn't sure if you'd come, she admitted, still staring out at the skyline. I wasn't sure if I should, Ethan said, stepping closer, but I wanted to. Claire finally turned to face him. The man standing in front of her was not the same one she had left behind all those years ago. There was something different about him now, something quieter, something rawer. I spoke to Daniel today, Ethan said. Claire's breath caught, but she kept her expression even. And? He wants to take things slow. He's not ready to call me his father, and I don't blame him. Ethan exhaled, but he didn't walk away this time, and that means something. Claire nodded, her chest tightening. She had been bracing for Daniel to be hurt, for Ethan to disappoint him. But instead Daniel had made his own choice, and Ethan for once had respected it. Maybe people could change. Ethan hesitated. And you? What do you want, Claire? Her eyes met his. For the first time she allowed herself to see him not as the man who had broken her heart, but as the man who had been broken by his own choices. She thought about the years they had lost, the way she had built herself into something formidable, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And yet standing here now, with Ethan in front of her, she realized something else. Winning had never been about beating him. It had been about finding herself. I don't know, Claire admitted, her voice quieter now. I don't know if I can ever go back to what we were. Ethan stepped closer, but not too close. I wouldn't ask you to. She searched his face, looking for the man who had once chosen power over love. But he wasn't there anymore. What would you ask? She murmured. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then softly, a chance. Claire let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of years lift just a little. Maybe they couldn't go back. But maybe, just maybe, they could go forward. She turned back toward the city, her lips curving ever so slightly. I guess we'll see. Ethan didn't press for more. He simply stood beside her, looking out at the skyline, at the city that had shaped them both. And for the first time in a long time, Claire didn't feel like she was standing alone.